We're going to be talking about generative AI and data storytelling. Now, generative AI, just as a quick overview, generative AI is using technology to be able to generate content. So there's different versions of generative AI. There's visual generative AI like DALL-E, where it can generate images. There's audio generative AI where it can generate sound. Maybe you've heard the Drake song that isn't really by Drake. It's awesome. Generative AI. What I use primarily is large language models. Large language models are text-based, and it works out really well for data storytelling. So for this session, I'm primarily focusing on large language models like Llama, Bard, and ChatGPT. So diving in here. So as Nathan said, here's the description that I pulled from the Data Science Dojo website, what we'll talk about. So we'll talk about the role of generative AI in data analytics and data storytelling. We'll look at some techniques. We'll talk about how it can drive business efficiency and gain insights into leveraging AI for effective data communication. Data communication is the crux of what we do as data analysts. And it's one reason that I've found a lot of success in my career is that ability to take complex concepts or insights and to communicate them effectively to drive meaningful change and value. It's not easy to do. I'm sure many of us have had the experience of spending hours and hours analyzing millions of rows of data to drive one insight, and then you come and present to leadership or an executive committee, a one slide, and that slide has to be so clear and drive one objective. But all the mountain of work behind it, deciding what goes on that slide and how it's presented and what the actual insight is such an important skill. And it's the critical skill that drives the value behind data analytics. And so generative AI really supercharges our ability to do that quickly and efficiently. So in terms of data storytelling, which we'll focus on here, where it falls in the overall data analytics process is really at the end. So for the overall analytics process, we're defining business requirements, we're collecting data, we're cleaning it, we're fixing it, we're standardizing it. Then we're doing our analysis, trying to figure out what does it look like, where are the insights. And then once we've gathered all of that, now we need to present, we need to reach some objective. And if we can't do that effectively, then all of the work that went into it was for naught. It doesn't mean anything if we can't reach that one objective at the very end of the overall process. So how does generative AI fit into this overall process? Well, it can really fit into any one of these steps. I'm going to use ChatGPT as our example today, and we're going to walk through a use case. So really, as we're going through, start thinking where could I use a large language model to augment my ability to be an effective data communicator? There's lots of concern. I hear it from my students. I've taught thousands of graduate students in data science and data analytics master's programs. And the concerns I'm hearing recently are, will ChatGPT take my job? Should I even be studying data analytics, or will this just all be done automatically? Will data engineering be done automatically? Analytics engineering, being able to create effective visuals? And I always say, no, it's not. I've worked extensively with the generative AI, and it's not going to take your job. But somebody who knows how to use generative AI will take your job. If you can't use it effectively, somebody who can use it to come in and do so much more work and more effective work more efficiently, they will take your job. So it's imperative that we learn how to use these tools to augment our natural abilities. So because data storytelling really falls at the very end of this overall process, that's what we're going to focus today is on present. So the present really breaks down into 3 different steps. We plan it out, we prepare, our visuals, and then we need to deliver. Generative AI can really augment every single step in the presentation process. It shouldn't replace us. It should augment us. So within those 3 stages of the storytelling steps, within step 1 of plan, right, we need to determine our purpose, our objective of why are we even here? We're telling a story. What story? Why are we telling a story? What's the one thing we need to happen as a result of our story? We need to determine our roles, our role as the story narrator and presenter, the audience's role as the hero of the story, and then what role is technology going to play in our story, including generative AI. We need to organize our evidence. We've done all this hard work and analysis, and we probably have tons and tons of evidence. We need to hone in on what's absolutely critical to support that objective. Let's organize it. Let's get it right. Let's get it clear. Now we prepare it. Once we've got all of these things, we've got our evidence organized. Now we need to really start crafting our narrative and putting that story together. We choose our visuals. That we could do, there's a million different ways to present information. We need to choose the best, most clear way to present our evidence and our information to reach our objective. And then we need to go back and examine our logic, both horizontal logic of does our narrative make sense from beginning to end, and our vertical logic of what I'm showing on the slide. Does it make sense from top to bottom? Does the title make sense? And does every single thing on that slide point to the objective and the title? So horizontal and vertical logic. Then the day of the presentation comes. We need to present. We're going to get objections depending on the format that we have. Questions and objections, concerns, which are good, right? You may be presenting to a board where there's, you can't get 10 seconds in without questions and concerns and objections coming up. Or you may be in more of a format like this, where they may not come up during the presentation, they may come up at the end. But if questions and concerns and objections aren't handled effectively, then you're not going to reach your objective. And then you also need to receive that feedback of how effective was it, so that you can continue to iterate and become more effective as you continue to be a data storyteller. So where does generative AI come in? Well, for the purposes of this presentation, as we'll talk about in the example, generative AI is going to focus on these key areas. So we'll walk through an example today of a presentation that we need to create and how we can use generative AI to do that. We're going to focus on plan and then the first couple steps of prepare. And then the ability to present and deliver effectively is a whole other talk. Generative AI certainly can play a role there, but it's much more heavy in the planning and the preparation stages of storytelling. Now, here's a good natural break. Are there any questions that I can address before we dive into this case study of how generative AI could help us in data storytelling?
There is one about, whether you're using proprietary data sources or generic data sets. But I think we may be able to save that one for the end. And then I want to ask Bala, I see your question in the chat. Can you move that into the Q&A for me? It'll just help me keep things organized. And that one's a little longer, so I'm probably going to save it for the end as well.
Excellent. For this example, I'm using a generic data set. Yeah, there's different privacy concerns depending on how you use large language models. Many institutions now, and of course, with CPRA, CCPA, the California privacy law, and then if you do international business, GDPR, and then India is passing a new privacy law shortly. Large language models are under scrutiny for what data goes into it, right? So there's different ways if you're using it at the enterprise level, you want to use it with enterprise data, there's different ways to do that safely and within your company's regulations. So there's private models that you can build on Snowflake and Azure and whatnot, or you can enter more generic information to get the info that you need out of ChatGPT or another large language model. And then your proprietary data doesn't go into it. So for the purposes of this presentation, it's really going to be a generic data set. So let's start at the beginning for determining your purpose. So how can we use AI to do that? So in this example, let's use ChatGPT. So what might that look like? So what I asked ChatGPT is, help me clarify the purpose of my presentation into one sentence. And here's the purpose that I've been given. In our example, our spending's too high. I don't want to do layoffs. Let's figure out a way to reduce spending and present a solution to leadership. So that's our case study. Spending's high, figure out a way to reduce spending. We don't want to do layoffs. Give us a solution, right? So in determining my purpose, I really wanted to hone in on what is the specific objective that I want to achieve. And sometimes it's hard to get that down to one sentence. And here's where generative AI can help us. So in ChatGPT, I told it, like, look, our spending's too high. I don't want to do layoffs. I need to speak with my team. What should the focus of my presentation be? Came back, it calls me Professor Madsen because I have instructions in there to call me Professor Madsen because I use it for a lot of different things. So ignore that. Here's the response that it gave me. It might be useful to focus your presentation on strategically reducing operational costs through data-driven decision-making without resorting to layoffs, right? So here's where we do our critical thinking. So I get that back. I can accept it. I can ask more questions like, does that resonate with me? Is that really the objective that I need to achieve? I thought about it. I'm like, yeah, okay. So strategically reducing operational costs through data-driven decision-making without resorting to layoffs. Perfect. That sounds great. I'm on board with that. So right here, we've already used generative AI to help consolidate our thoughts and identify a really well-articulated, clear purpose of our presentation, of the story that we want to tell. So the next step is really role clarity. So this is one aspect of data storytelling that a lot of folks who maybe haven't had traditional training or got thrown into it, they're like, hey, you're an analyst. Now let's start doing presentations. I need to go meet with leadership. Role clarity is incredibly important. So ChatGPT, large language models, generative AI can also help with this aspect of data storytelling. If I was new and now ChatGPT and I are on the same page of here's the objective of my presentation that we're about to start creating, what's my role as the presenter? All right, so ChatGPT tells us, let's narrow it down to 3 roles. Data interpreter, check, that sounds right. I should be the data interpreter. Strategist, with the ask of leadership in our example, they want us to come prepared with recommendations. Yep, strategist, that makes sense. And motivator, because we are, if we're looking to cut costs, right, we are likely in a difficult position. We are coming with a strategic answer. We do need to be that motivator for here's a specific solution in order for us to reduce costs and avoid layoffs. So that resonates. Again, critical thinking. Does this make sense? Does it not? Should I go back and ask more questions? Does this align with information that I already know, with the beliefs that I already have about data storytelling? This checks out. This was the first response that it gave me, and it is a good response. So we need to keep this in mind. So we focus on our objective. Here's what we want to accomplish as a result of our presentation. What's my role? These 3 things. So as we go and we craft our presentation, we focus on these 3 things: interpret the data, create a strategy, and be the motivator, be persuasive. That's our role as the presenter in this case. So I'm going to pause there. What questions are there?
All right, so I think most people are saying like so far so good, but there's a question about why not using using it's I think referring to ChatGPT or to examine your logic as well. But and I'm sorry if I'm butchering this person's name, Yehuda. If you can provide some context, that would be helpful. I'm just not sure what it is referring to. Um, Andrew, maybe you can think of it.
Yeah, if the question is why aren't we using large language models or generative AI to examine our logic, you can, and I do, but not in this example. I'm not going to. So you can use it in each step of a data storytelling presentation and preparation. In this example, I'm not doing it because you'll see, we're not creating the master slides. So when I'm creating like a presentation for the board, I create a master slide outline where it's a piece of paper and each slide is a little square, and I've got it at a high level what the title is of each slide and approximately what the visual and the info on that slide is going to be. And the logic there is horizontal, as we talked about. Does the narrative across the slides make sense? And then does the vertical logic of does the action title, the visuals, and the information also make sense? And does every single thing across all those slides, the logic, specifically point to reaching that objective? You 100% can use large language models to evaluate that. We're just not doing it in this case study.
Okay. And then from Neil, it's unclear to me what inputs you are giving to ChatGPT. How does it know the data and what your qualifications are?
Yep. So the qualifications are that I've given it previous instructions. So in terms of qualifications, so in at least in ChatGPT, you can add static instructions that are always there. So it will always pull those instructions. So part of those instructions that I've added into ChatGPT are my background. Otherwise, you could always add that to each new chat that you start. Like, I am a data analyst, I am a product manager, whatever it is, to help provide that context. The data we haven't added yet. So far, it's only been prompts. So as you can see, here's the input. Here's my question that I asked. What's my role as the presenter? Here's the response. So there's no data in it yet.
Okay, and I think we can continue from here. And sorry, I do see your questions. If you have questions, I do see it. But let's continue with the talk.
Awesome. So here we get to adding the data. So let's say we've got our data set, we've got access to it. In this example, what I did is I used ChatGPT for the advanced analysis option. This is what they formerly called code interpreter. You can also use the Notable plugin. Llama just rolled out a couple weeks ago their version of code interpreter. It's very good. So there's lots of different ways. So the code specific or analyst specific versions of large language models is what I would go with here, especially in this case study. So going forward now, we're moving from general, in this case, ChatGPT, right? But you can use Llama, Bard, whatever. Now we're moving into the code specific version of it. So the next step of the storytelling, right? Now we need to organize our evidence. We know what our objective is. We know our role. Okay, we know what we're trying to achieve. Let's gather and organize our evidence. So what I did here in this example, I attached the data to my chat. And here's the exact question I asked it. It shows, here's what the data shows, right? It shows year to date versus the approved spend. Show me a chart with the key areas of overspending. Here's what I asked it. So I uploaded a file, right? But you can also, there's ways through Notable, especially, to connect it to a notebook and your other data. But I'm telling it, here's year to date versus approved spend. I'm not going super into the details. Like, I could tell it, like, here's this column, here's what that column represents, here's this column, here's what this column represents. I kept it super high level so that you can see how intuitive the code interpreter really is. But it doesn't replace you this should be giving us our good ideas, and it should guide us, but we should always, always, always be double checking, be verifying. We need to check the data quality. We are 100% responsible for what we create and present. You can't just blindly accept anything from generative AI. So that's the caveat. So here's what I asked it, right? I attached my data, show me this stuff. Here's what it came out with. So it started with some text. It was just straight copied and pasted from the response. It says, hey, your marketing department has an overspend, R&D has an overspend, operations has an overspend, HR has an overspend, IT has a small overspend. Great. It's not what I wanted, though. I wanted it in a chart. So then it sent me this chart. So within generative AI, now we're starting to organize our evidence. We're overspending. Our objective is to reduce spending in this example. Now it's showing me, here's the overspending amount organized from smallest to largest. I can use, my critical thinking. Oh, good. Marketing and R&D, operations, HR. These are my largest areas of overspend. Being strategic about it, right? One of our roles as the presenter and the data analyst creator is to be strategic. We need to be the strategist and come prepared with a recommendation. Let's be strategic and let's go with the largest overspend and see where the ability to reduce spending may be. So this is the chart that it provided. In terms of double checking your data quality and work, one thing that I do like to do with code interpreters specifically is to get the code that it used. So you can tell it like, hey, show me the Python code. Show me whatever code. It's usually Python. Show me the Python code that you used to create this chart. Let me go in and look at the logic. I cut it off because it was a fairly long code, but you get the idea. So then I can go in and I can read the code of, okay, here's what it did. Here, I agree with it. I don't agree with it. It left this out. It made this assumption, whatever it is. So that's an incredibly powerful ability of code interpreter to be able to generate that code for you so that you can go in and you can verify it. You can duplicate it. You can replicate it. Right? One of the key tenets of science is that it's reproducible. This helps us do that and it keeps us honest. So I'd recommend that as you create your stories, you gather your evidence, always get and review the code. So we've identified marketing in our example. Okay, marketing's the biggest one. Okay, ChatGPT, break down the marketing areas by overspending amount. Here's what it sent me. So this time it knows now that I wanted a chart, and it broke it down for me into the different areas. The info I fed it had the subcategories as part of the information. So we can see, again, it's using logic, which again, we can verify. We can look at the Python code, but it's going from smallest to largest. We're trying to be strategic and identify what are the best areas to spend. But if we're thinking strategically, we could ask it like, well, is this really being strategic? Is this being a data-driven way of thinking about reducing costs? Like just look at the largest cost. What's another way to think about that? ROI, right? So it's not just what's the biggest overspend, but it's, well, what are we spending a lot on something, but we're getting a really good return on investment for that? Let's take a look. So then I asked ChatGPT, hey, show me the ROI for each area of overspend. So then it showed me the ROI. I also asked it, I should have put it up here, what's the calculation for ROI? It showed it to me. I agreed with it. You can provide it your own calculation. You can look at the code. But this was the correct calculation for ROI that I would use. And it's something that I would put in the appendix of a presentation, right? Like here's my methodology. Here's how I calculated ROI, right? And we're responsible for going in and double checking any numbers. But this is helping us gather and create and organize our evidence. So I can say, okay, marketing was the biggest area that had overspend. Here's the different areas of marketing, but I don't necessarily just want to cut the biggest areas. What's giving me the best ROI? Oh, well, SEO, It's got crazy ROI. Advertising, although it's the biggest area of overspend, it also has the largest ROI. We don't want to cut just advertising for the sake of cutting it. It's generating money for us, and we're trying to generate. We don't want to take away our money making machine when we're considering layoffs, right? So this is us being strategic. So it looks like social media, we're spending a fair amount, and PR, spending a fair amount, has incredibly low ROI. So us being the strategic and critical thinkers, we're going to focus on those two areas. So how can we use generative AI? So I asked it, hey, if I reduce the spending, if I cut the spending of social media and PR, what would that savings be? And it told me, it said it would be a $3,000 savings, and it would cut the marketing overspend by 25%. I'm not just concerned with the marketing overspend. I'm concerned with the enterprise overspend. They didn't say, hey, just reduce marketing. They said, hey, figure out a way to reduce overspend from the enterprise. So I asked it again, well, so what's the reduction for the company? 8.3%. That's pretty good. 8 to 10% overspend reduction is a pretty good reduction. So, right, we're dealing with smaller numbers, it just based on the data that I fed into the system, but percentage wise, right? Okay, well, we've identified using a large language model and generative AI, here's where our overspend is, here's the lowest ROI on that overspend, and here's how much we could save. We can go back, we can do more investigation. In this case study, I feel good. I feel like I'm starting to get the picture of a recommendation that I could make to leadership for areas that we can reduce overspend in a strategic way. Pause there. What questions do we have?
I think a better question is, what questions don't we have?
Uh-oh.
We've got a whole lot. So first one I'll answer, will this recording be available? Yes, if you go to Data Science Dojo's YouTube channel, it will pop up there. Tiffany wants to know, or they're saying it would be helpful to see the data you inputted because it must have some pre-processing and formatting for ChatGPT in order to do those ROI calcs.
It doesn't actually. Yeah, I can include the file in the info that they send out. It didn't have any pre-processing. It was a pretty basic file, but you could do EDA, right, to identify, like, are there nulls? Is it supposed to be a number format and there's some strings in there? Those types of things. So there weren't a lot of errors in the data that I fed into it, but it wasn't a perfect data set either. In order for it to do the ROI calculation, it just read the column with the approved spend and then the year-to-date actual spend, right? It's doing that calculation on its own, if that helps.
Okay. And then I'm seeing a relevant question to that from Neil in the chat. And sorry, I'm pulling this from the chat instead of the Q&A. Please, if you have a question, put it in Q&A. But Neil is asking, there's like 1,000 different ways to calculate ROI. So do you give ChatGPT the formula, or I know you mentioned that you ask it to tell you how it's being calculated and then you kind of agree with it or not, but is that something that you tell it beforehand, or does it just do it and tell you about it later?
So in this case study, I asked it how it's calculating it, and it showed me the calculation. It's one I agreed with. If I was presenting this to finance, like in this case study, in this hypothetical example, we probably are presenting it to like the CFO, right? We're talking about reducing cost. We need to identify what the enterprise definition of ROI is, and then I would feed that into ChatGPT and say, here's the definition of ROI. Show me the ROI. That's how I would handle that.
Okay, perfect. And okay, and then last question before we move on. Is there a separate component in, this person said chart GPT, is there a separate component to analyze the data and then pipe those analysis results to an LLM? Or do you know the name of that component, or is there an open source equivalent? Did that make any
So,
sense at all?
trying to understand it. So is it more of a workflow of serving results and then putting those back into a different LLM? This is all within the same module, right? Like it's remembering the results. It's doing the calculations, it's creating the charts all within the same chat.
Okay. I'm gonna call that good. So sorry, Alex, if there's anything you want us to expand on that, let us know. But for the sake of time and um, let's continue. And I know the questions are piling up. I see them all, so I do not think we're going to be able to get through every single question. So I'm going to do my best. And something that, as an audience member, if you want to help me out, go and give a thumbs up to a question if you have the same question or a similar question that's already on there. It'll just help me prioritize which questions more people want answered, right? So go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, and these are all fantastic questions. And again, this is like a caricature. It's a hypothetical example, a basic example of ways to use generative AI in data storytelling, right? So nothing's perfect. There might be real data, right? We would need to do more EDA. We need to examine nulls. We need to fix some stuff. ChatGPT could do that, or it could give you the code to do that, whatever it is. So again, think about this as a caricature, but it's teaching the concepts, right, that you can apply then to your actual work. Is it perfect? No, but the high level concepts that it is teaching are correct, for sure. Yep. So now we've gathered our data, right? We've decided, hey, here's the areas we want to reduce our spend. Let's choose some visuals. So here's what I asked to create a visual that summarizes the problem, the evidence, and the solution. I like to ask generative AI high-level questions and just see what it spits out, because it helps me with my idea generation, right? Like I'm going to go back in and create the visuals. I'm going to create them the way that I want them. But this is really this is such a great way to brainstorm. It's like having a partner to brainstorm with, see what works, see what doesn't work. It's so efficient. So here's what I asked it. Here's what it came up with. So I said, hey, summarize the problem, the evidence, the solution. It summarized the problem, right? Here's all of our overspend. The evidence, it showed the ROI for each department. What's the solution? We've got the subcategory. Does that make perfect sense? I would definitely make changes to it, but this really helps me understand, like, where do I need to start? Where am I going with my presentation, and where do I need to end up? We need to end up with, here's our recommendation for reducing overspend and how much can we save. So it helps me start thinking of how can I visually show this information in a logical way. If you want to customize the visuals, again, it can generate the code. You can tell it, hey, do it this way, create this type of chart, create a scatter plot, create a waterfall chart. It can do that. Show me the Python code for XYZ, because you're going to actually build it yourself. Or hey, tell me how I would do the, like, great chart, ChatGPT. How would I do this in Power BI? Or hey, ChatGPT, you're showing me this as if I'm going to give a PowerPoint presentation to the board, but actually I'm going to present it to a senior manager who really likes a dashboard. What's the difference between creating a static presentation and an interactive dashboard? What are the drill down levels that you'd recommend, ChatGPT? Do you have to blindly follow it? No, and you shouldn't. You need to think about it critically. But it's an idea generation. It can really help you. Like, yeah, that is a good drill down idea. And I wouldn't have thought about that. Or, oh, I need to pay attention to the difference in the interactivity between the static and the dashboard. All great ways that you're really going to augment your own ability as the data storyteller. So we've chosen our visuals. Let's just say that I'm good with this in real world, right? I would generate different visuals, but this is such a good way to generate those ideas and see the story from beginning to end. But now I need to start putting together my narrative of what I'm going to say. So, hey, ChatGPT, help me summarize the narrative. Perfect. So here's what it popped out. Here's the overspending by department, explains the visual. Here's the ROI department by department, explains the visual. Here's our solutions, right? Here's key takeaways. Companies facing significant overspend, ROI. Here's where here's the places that have the lowest ROI, and we recommend reducing. So now we've gone from the very beginning of, hey, data analyst, we have a problem, we need help with it. Let's solidify that objective of, okay, we need to do some analysis. We need to create a presentation with a recommendation. Let's create a very specific objective as a result of our story that we're going to tell. We use generative AI to explore our data, to come up with a thoughtful and reasonable way to identify the best place to reduce spend. It helped us create our visuals. It helped us craft a logical narrative, and it provided us with key takeaways. So from there, now you're really generating your presentation, you're creating it, you're honing it, right? And this took me 30 minutes, right, from beginning to end to really just generate those ideas and go from nothing of here's a problem to, okay, I now have a narrative. I have a good idea of the evidence. I feel good about really crafting this presentation. Now I can, put pen to paper and really create something effectively. Super fast. Where before, what would I have done before? I'd be doing a lot of things in pandas. I'd be maybe exploring it visually through Tableau, which are all good, perfect, awesome. But this helped me do it super fast. I'm still going to verify all of that information. I'm responsible for anything I put out. But this really supercharged my ability to quickly get a good handle of what I'm working with and where I want to go, and my plan of attack of how am I strategically going to go forward in this presentation. So again, this was a super high level example of using generative AI in data storytelling, but the concepts are all there. I use them regularly. I've used them literally 2 weeks ago. I used it in a board meeting for a Fortune 500 company. So these tools have helped me be so much more effective. But again, I want this to be an interactive session. So questions, let's talk about it.
Whew, all right, sorry, I was just scrolling from the bottom of the questions to the top. So thank you so much, Andrew. So just a reminder, if you have questions, toss them in the Q&A tab for me if you're on Zoom. And if you're in a live stream, whatever chat you have available to you, we'll grab those and bring them in for you. Andrew, so how do you, and this is from Sammy. So let's say you do this for a month, and so what is the best way to automate the same analysis every month and say, send an email to all consumers? Is that something that you can tell your large language model, hey, I want this done every month for the next time period?
You can't tell a open source large language model that. There are ways to build, well, I guess maybe you could. You could get access to the API for ChatGPT or other large language models, and you could build a workflow integrating that API. You also could get the code, right? So that's something else you could ask ChatGPT is, hey, I want to automate this going forward. What is the Python code that I would need? And you could use that to validate it. So there's a few ways that you could do it. Just using the basic example that I did, you wouldn't just do it in the chat. You would need to take some extra steps of either getting access to the API and building a workflow around that, or getting Python code so that you pull the large language model out of the equation and you're really just analyzing for ROI each month.
Okay, perfect. And let me remove that one. Perfect. So from sorry, it's Anna or Anna. I'm going to say Anna. In a business context, how could we use this upload tool given, I think it's PII concerns. I think it's, data privacy. Data anonymization is one of the hardest things to do. So how do we address those concerns?
Yep, don't. So either ask it general questions that don't contain PII, right? Most organizations are saying, and it's not new. We don't enter proprietary PII into open source platforms, right? That's kind of a general rule across most enterprises. Many organizations are building proprietary LLMs, so closed LLMs on their own data. Perfect. That all stays internal. You can do it with Azure, Snowflake. There's lots of tools that you can use to do that. You can do private compute, which is a very interesting technology out there. But if your company's not doing that and you still want to use generative AI to augment your ability as a data analyst, you just leave PII out. You could ask it, for instance, I'm a data analyst, right? You're not putting in your company. I'm a data analyst and I am trying to reduce spend and avoid layoffs. I have a Excel, whatever it is. Here's the structure of my data frame. Here's the columns. Like, you would describe it, but you wouldn't put the actual info in there. And you could say, generate the Python code to help me calculate ROI. Now you're taking that code and you're putting it into your notebook, your Jupyter notebook, or whatever you're using on your company's VPN, right? So now you haven't given the large language model any PII, but it's still generating value for you. It's helping you generate code and ideas that you can then take and put into a secure environment.
Perfect. So are LLMs able to identify incorrect data and fix it? So like, say if you're putting in your input was supposed to be in dollars, but you accidentally put it in rupees or a different currency, or if it's temperature, you put it in Celsius instead of Fahrenheit.
You would need to recognize that. So I would say, just in those examples off the top of my head, if I understand the question correctly, like, it's not going to know what you meant. It's not going to know that if I'm envisioning the data frame and I don't know how it would get from Celsius to Fahrenheit, to be honest. Like, it's in the data frame, right? Like, it's already there, but you could catch it, right? So as you're doing your exploratory data analysis and you are looking at this chart of temperatures, you're like, oh, it says 30, it's like 27 to 33 everywhere, but I'm supposed to be looking at Fahrenheit. You can tell it, like, hey, convert this to Fahrenheit. I would check it, right, and say, like, hey, ChatGPT, how would you convert this to Fahrenheit, so that I know that it's doing it correctly before it would do it. But yes, it can do that for sure, or it can generate the code to allow you to do it on your own.
Alrighty. Let's make sure to.
Yeah, code interpreter is very intuitive. A lot of the traditional EDA or like data cleaning, it'll do that on its own. It'll identify nulls. It may ask you, like, how do you want me to handle nulls? It does do a lot of that on its own when you connect it to a large data source and you do more of that data cleaning. We didn't do any data cleaning in this example, but it's incredibly impressive with its ability to go in and really clean and hone data and describe what it's doing to you.
All right, and so this question's from Jose. The challenge for professionals in the near future will be to find the perfect balance between AI and human thinking, including the way of performing storytelling. What is your opinion on it?
I don't think anything changes in terms of our role as storytellers. Like, there's three roles in data storytelling. You've got the presenter, the narrator, is same person, right? I'm giving different names for the same thing. So the presenter, who's generally the analyst, is the narrator of the story. Then you've got the audience. They're your hero of the story. That doesn't change. They're the ones who need to do something to reach your objective. You're not reaching your objective on your own. Otherwise, you wouldn't be presenting to anybody. You could just go do it and not talk to anybody. you're needing the audience to help you reach this objective, right? So they are the hero of the story. The role of technology really hasn't changed. Technology's always been the facilitator. It's always augmented the ability for the narrator to effectively connect to the audience. That hasn't changed. The type of technology has changed. The ability of the technology has changed, but the role of the technology has not changed.
Okay. And what limits do you see in terms of data size and complexity? Like, have you tried feeding in multiple data sets and seeing what that outcome is?
Yes, I have. I have put in some fairly large data sets into ChatGPT. We're using the Notable plugin. I haven't run into the limitations yet because I don't typically use it for my actual analysis. So I may give it an example of what my data looks like. So it's usually a smaller example or sample or something that's anonymized or just like a caricature of what my actual data is, keeping PII out of the system, right? So I haven't put like a full enterprise file on a large language model. I'm sure there are limits. I haven't found them because I'm not using my proprietary data in that system, if that makes sense. If somebody else knows what the limit is, feel free to let us know. But I haven't reached it. But I have plugged multiple data sets in, had done joins, and done robust analysis. You could do machine learning through the, what do they don't call it code interpreter. What I say, advanced data analysis module in ChatGPT. So it'll split it right into training and testing. So yeah, it's super robust, but again, like anything, it has trade-offs and limitations.
And then we got a couple of questions about recommended resources. So Joshua wants to know if you have any, recommendations for resources that list out preferred syntax for prompt engineering in data visualization and code documentation, and then another one for any recommended books or online resources on data storytelling.
Yeah, data storytelling. There's really good ones. So let's start with prompt engineering. I don't think there's a book on prompt engineering that I'm familiar with. At least I haven't read one. But I would recommend John Crone's Super Data Science podcast. He does an episode where he demonstrates step by step using the advanced data analysis plugin to do machine learning. And he shows his prompts that he would use. So I recommend watching the YouTube version of that podcast so that you can see what he's doing in terms of prompt engineering for data analysis or data science. For data storytelling, Storytelling with Data by Cole Nussbaumer Knaflic, classic, right? Super simple, super good. Brent Dykes has effective data storytelling. Really good. And in fact, I think ASU uses that in their freshman data class or their undergraduate data class. Yeah, I'm writing a book on it. It's not out, so you can't buy it. But hopefully it's not a garbage book. So maybe you can check that out when it comes out next year. Nancy Durante. I think I'm butchering her last name because I'm not Googling her right now. Nancy is incredible at messaging and data storytelling. So check out Nancy as well. And she's, in my opinion, Nancy's the gold standard. All the rest of us are trying to be Nancy because she knows exactly what she's talking about. Incredibly smart, super, super focused on the concepts. So I'd recommend her work as well.
And a couple people asking, can you type them out and post them here? We will have this recorded. So if we don't get them in the chat for you, just in the recording, fast forward to the end and you'll hear Andrew, giving these recommendations again. All right. Let's try to do a couple more questions because I know we have about 3 minutes left, and I don't want to take up everybody's time because I think we could spend probably a whole nother hour just answering questions. But um, we kind of already talked about PII and the
Mhm.
impact of privacy, um, uh, and how safe it is for in regards to critical data. And Andrew's answer to that was like, don't put anything critical into a public large language model. And you can there are you know you can create an internal tool for that. It's actually what we do in our large language model bootcamp. But so I'm gonna skip this. I know I was the one that liked this, but I'm gonna skip that one. And so Bala, I've seen your question posted a couple of times. We're gonna answer it now. Um, uh, uh, Bala is saying it will be helpful if there's more of an explanation on step analysis, EDA. Uh, uh, is there any process you follow to narrow down and choose your techniques in storytelling, or is there a place where maybe or a resource where Bala could go and learn?
So step analysis. I'm not looking at the question, but just thinking on what you said, Nathan. So is the question, how do I learn how to do EDA in the context of effective data storytelling? Is that the question?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I mean, there's a million YouTube videos on it, on how to do a exploratory data analysis. I recommend StatQuest with Josh Starmer, because he goes into the math, right? So part of EDA might be principal component analysis. You might be doing some stepwise functions. Josh goes in depth into the math, but he makes it approachable. In terms of just a quick and simple, like how do I do EDA in Python? I think Nathan Galli, Galli, I believe, has a good YouTube video where he does Python EDA on like a sales data set, which is super helpful. Again, caricatures of real life, right? Like we get messed up data that, can we even trust it, right? So we're joining it 40 times to get some kind of data set that we can start doing our EDA on. But the concepts are right so that they can help you learn the fundamentals and then go apply them to more complex situations.
Sounds good. Thank you. And then two more questions. I think they'll be fairly quick. But Andrew, how do we have a GPT produce visuals? This person says, I can't seem to get GPT to display images.
So if you're using ChatGPT, you do need the premium version to use the advanced data analysis tab or plugins. You can use Llama. Llama has the ability to do that, and I don't think there's any cost to Llama, so you could do it that way as well. Standard free, the free version of ChatGPT, I don't believe will do it, but there are other alternatives that are free that could replicate it. I'm not sure their accuracy. I don't use them a lot. The Llama is particularly good for a free version, but I pay for the version of ChatGPT because I trust it and find it very intuitive and helpful.
Okay, sounds good. And there are a lot. Where is the question that I'm looking for? And while I look for this question, because I lost it for a minute, if we're not going to be able to answer all of the questions today, that's just the reality of the time that we have. But we do have a Discord channel available where if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, I would really encourage you to join that Discord. I think they call it Discord servers, right? I'm not a Discord person. Join that server and then copy and paste your question there. And I think the link will be posted in the chat if it hasn't already. And put your question there, and it should help. And we'll try to get to as many as we can. um, in answering those. Where did my question go? It was about so how does the AI and we I mean again we've talked about PII, but how does the AI handle copyright and intellectual property? And this kind of goes into, I know there's a lawsuit out. I don't know if there's been a decision made on it, where artists are suing a couple of these generative AI models and companies, because it's been taking their work and learning off of their work and creating similar similar pieces of art. So
Mhm.
Andrew, maybe you have some insight on how copyright and intellectual property is being handled.
Yeah, it's a pending question, right? We don't know the data source. They don't have to release the data sources to us of what it scraped, right? Like Reddit saying like, we think we were scraped, and Wikipedia saying we were scraped. And Elon Musk is like, for sure they scraped Twitter. Sarah Silverman's suing because she's like, they scraped my book. I don't know how she knows they scraped her book. But currently the inputs into the large language models, right? Like there's billions of tokens. We don't know what those tokens are. And some of them are um, manually entered, right? There's humans aspects to this training. So it's not just web crawling. We don't know at this point how it is, but if you're using a proprietary model that your company builds, right, then you know what the inputs are. So it's something to be cognizant of, and it's an outstanding ethical question of it is the material are the creators of the inputs, do they have the right to be compensated for any revenue generated from the outputs? It's not answered, and that's not clear. Like we've been web crawling forever, right? Like the first thing I learned to do in Python was beautiful soup and web crawl, right? And pull stuff off the census and whatnot, and then do machine learning on it. It hasn't been a question before, so we'll see how that pans out.